Eustis, Florida, and first they let her check out books, and Bennett was more light-skinned complexion, and I don't think someone had necessarily assumed her to be African American, and then when it was actually known that she was African American, they revoked her privileges at the library. So lots of problems that she's encountering, and her husband is encountering a lot of problems. He's starting to drink a lot because of his frustration that he's facing there. So they move back to Harlem, and Bennett is so thrilled. She's like, yes, I'm finally going to get back, to the DC area, to literally the streets of Harlem and see my friends. She'd made some trips back in that time that her husband was, full-time at the doctor's in Florida. She actually, at the Schomburg that I'm going to tomorrow night, she did some readings with County Cullen and others, and she was so excited to be back. But of course, by this particular point, the Great Depression is sweeping through Harlem. And in her diary entries, one of her entries is, I cannot begin to describe the shock I received. Coming back to Harlem. I'd been in the South and seen their poverty among Negroes and had steeled myself against it with the feeling that if I could only return to Harlem, there again I would find warmth and laughter. Because again, she was in the center of the Renaissance that was taking place. So when she's back, Harlem itself seems shaken to the same type of shock that I had been experiencing in Florida. Dazed, I went to some of the old haunts where they still existed. I found no gathered group of intellectuals, but rather the angry mutterings of Negroes who had come to seek the reason why. I stayed indoors. I did not want to see it. I did not want to believe it. Where was Harlem? So, Bennett's back. She's like, yay, I'm finally back. And she's distraught. She's like, where is this community? And it wasn't that long. She left in 28. This is only a couple of short years. The time of your degree that you're doing here in Howard. Imagine, leaving your home, California, other places around the country, and just imagining it being completely kind of decimated in some ways. And, even seeing your friends, but your friends just being totally devastated. Just everything is different. So, Bennett is so devastated. So then she starts, she really starts to work on education. That's another part of Bennett's life. So here she is at the School for Democracy. She's in the center there with, pupils and others around her. She starts protesting at a lot of rallies, trying to get more funding, for the arts and things like that. So Bennett kind of starts moving into, although she's still though she's still writing poetry, she's doing a lot more when it actually comes to civil engagement, in the Harlem community. And one of the poems that has been republished a couple of times, I found it, Carrie Nelson at the University of Illinois. He is a big modernist scholar, and he did a big collection on modernist poetry, and I shared this poem with him, and he's like, I want it, and we need to get it published in here. I often use it as a companion to Langston Hughes's I Too America. It's a very long poem, and I only have excerpts of it here, but it is a full-length poem in the collection. But I'll just read just a couple of stanzas so that you can get an idea of it here. I built America, mortared brick on brick, and in with each I lay the heart of all my brothers, dead from coast to another sea. Mixed with gravel and cement and sand, I turn the powdered bones of all the dead who lie from Canada to Mexico's warm Gulf. I am the dead building America. Let's see here. I am the topsoil strewn over storm-tried Florida, where I, 1,000 strong, lay piled against a morning day. It is my last breath sowing through that burning coal, mined where the shaft fell. That riddled thing, lowered by weeping Negroes from a lynching tree, was me. That dangling scalp hanging from a redskin's belt was mine. The red man, the black man, the white, lying end to end beneath cities and towns and riverbeds and under docks, whose dust is mingled yet with farm and field and growing grain for food or cloth, are one with me. I died 1,000 strong, 1,000,000 strong, in 1,000 different places, pioneering on battle fronts, in skies at the land of brother citizens, by lynch ropes and with police clubs, I died building America. So this is a poem that's very different from, the earlier ones that are talking about, the beautiful, moonlight and, the beautiful African-American female body and sensuous and very, to usward, very positive kind of anthems, uniting the African-American community. This one, she's bringing together, the red, the black, the white, but you can see that in the building of America, what has been lost, in this building of America. So, yep, okay, yep. All right, so and another one that she has, which I won't go into, but Threadney for Spain. She talks about the Spanish-American War, and that's another thing that I think Claude McKay's Amiable with Big Teeth has received a lot of traction, because he's talking about, what's happening in other cultures and things like that. So I won't read that one, but that's another example of Bennett's work. So there you go. That's my little snapshot of Gwen for you. So I think I'll take questions at this particular.
You can stay up there.
Okay.
Okay. So I hope everybody enjoyed that, and we're able to develop. Sorry, thank you, sir. And we're able to develop some questions in your mind that you might want to pose to Professor Wheeler. Does anybody have any questions or any comments? Yes, ma'am. Hold on.
Hello, my name is Marquise Taylor. I'm a junior history major here at Howard University. And I have a quick question for you as to kind of what inspired you to use certain, pictures of Gwendolyn Bennett. I'm very familiar with Gwendolyn Bennett. I'm from New York City. I did research at the Schomburg Center. I looked at her collection, and this is one of my favorite pictures of Gwendolyn Bennett. Out of that entire collection, it's a very expansive collection of her photographs.
Yep.
So I'm just interested to know. And then I looked at your book, and some of the other pictures, those are like my favorites. So kind of.
Yeah, that's actually, I'm glad you actually mentioned the photos, because Sonia had asked me, like, how big is the repository at the Schomburg? And I was like, well, when it actually comes to the papers, it's pretty small. Like the papers itself, with the exception of the FBI files, her actual, what's left of her, poetry and letters and things like that is quite small. But the photograph collection is amazing. There's a number of photos, and I would have liked to have had more in the edited collection, but there was, it's not cheap to get Bennett's work. The Schomburg has worked really well with us. They could have charged us probably $100,000, for example, for copyright permissions of, because they are the guardians of Bennett's archive. So we worked with the Schomburg and Penn State University Press, and I think we were allowed like six images that we could do in this particular book. And then it was kind of hard, like, well, what will you use? And, we thought that we definitely had to have at least one or two of the magazine covers, because, that's an excellent part of her work that was really important to her. And I also wanted to do the reproduction of the painting that I found of Bennett's, because I thought, since it's the only known painting of Bennett's today, that it would be really good to have that in there. But we only have, I think, with the exception of this one, there's one of her as a young girl, and there's that other picture of her at the center. I think they're the three kind of Bennett snapshots, that are in the collection, and that was hard. And Louis Parascandola, who's the co-editor of this, he's at Long Island University. He's a Caucasian scholar, but he does a lot of stuff with African American work. He and I were just kind of poring over these photos, and this one, I got the winning vote on this one, and Penn State University Press really liked it, and Lewis was like, yeah, sure. And I like this one because it shows different sides, of Bennett, like literally, like an angle shot and things like that. And a lot of the photos that you see of Bennett on Google, there's actually a couple that are out there that are clearly not Bennett, but they're marked as Bennett. It's like, that's so not Bennett. So I like this one because it's, a candid kind of old school, I don't even know if they have those little machines now where you can take the little snapshots like that. If you do, they're not as common as they were back then. So, I kind of like that one there. And then the earlier photo of her when she's sitting, I think she's like 9 or 10 at the time. I like that one because it's Bennett before she kind of became what I consider, Bennett, that kind of thing. And then the one with her in the group I really like because, again, it's her in the center. And I hope, I'm still trying, please, someone bring it down from the heavens. I would love to see a photo of her with, County Cullen, Langston Hughes, kind of in that center. And we haven't seen that one yet. So I would love to have one of those. But yeah, it was a hard decision to kind of figure out, okay, you got 3 images that you can kind of have as Bennett kind of portraits, and what would those be? So I did the individual, this one that's the strip on the cover. Then I did an early shot Harlem, and she had one marriage that failed. I didn't mention her first husband became a major alcoholic, was having multiple affairs, and he ended up dying in the early 1930s, and her second husband was actually a Caucasian American, and they had a very long, happy marriage to one another. When she retired to Pennsylvania, they had an antique store and things like that. And I thought about, a picture of her with her first husband or a picture of her with her second husband, but I just wanted kind of Bennett herself, except for when she was with, this kind of Harlem community, because her first marriage it started with so much passion and intensity and excitement, and it became such a failure for her in so many ways. And the second marriage was good, but there was so much history that had come before it that I was like, I don't know about a picture of either of, her with her husband. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but yeah, there's a great collection of her photos at the Schomburg, and I'm hoping, with a grant, like an NEH grant or something like that, we might be able to digitize more, because the ones that we chose for the book and we paid the fees for it are now available on the collection. So this little one that's on the front cover, you can now actually pull from the Schomburg archive, and you can use it as your wallpaper or something like that. But it took someone to pay the fee for it to then actually be digitized. So it's going to take a while to get those, because it's so expensive, or it's time consuming. As digitizing, stuff in the library, it takes a lot of time. So, but maybe I could write a grant and get some more, up there, Yeah, I'm so glad that you saw the Bennett archive. That's awesome.
Thank you for that question. Does anyone else have questions or comments? Yes, ma'am, in the back here. Hold on, let me get the microphone to you.
Could you talk a little bit about her relationship with Alain Locke? And also, what happened toward the end of her life? Where did she die? What
Thank you. It's always, when you're doing these things, like how much do you go into detail? So Alain Locke, we have in the collection. There's a couple of thank you. There's a couple of letters, communication where Bennett had written to Alain, particularly where she was being targeted, by the FBI for the communist sympathizing, and she was writing to him, hoping for letters of support and things like that. So there's evidence through the letters that they had a pretty solid relationship with one another, because the kind of rhetoric that she's using in the letters kind of shows a level of familiarity with one another. When it comes to actual documentation of the two of them being in spaces together, that I have not been able to uncover as yet. So we've got the letters there. And I've been talking to a number of different Alain Locke scholars to kind of see, because a lot of the stuff I'm finding with Bennett, which happens to be in other collections around the country, is often in miscellaneous or just simply miscatalogued. Because again, Bennett isn't considered, a leading figure. Like when I was at, where was I? I forget where I was, University of Texas, that's right. I was doing something on Australian Aboriginal literature. And then there ended up being this letter, it was so miscatalogued. It was a Langston Hughes original, and it was in a miscellaneous thing, and it was like, and I actually had another issue like that with Emory, and Emory has a lot of resources, and they don't usually miscatalog anything. And yet, 2 instances where I found, your breath stops and you're like, hang on, got to go tell the librarian right away. And then they're like, oh, okay. And then they, collect it and then they start, putting it in the place. That doesn't happen with Gwendolyn Bennett material right now. So if someone sees it, they're like, oh yeah, and then just kind of go over. So I think that there is material available in archives which will show a closer association between Gwen and Alain Locke. But, there's more of her communication and documentation with her and W.E.B. Du Bois, for example, than there is with Locke. But again, I think it is there. It just hasn't been catalogued the right way, or maybe someone has it in a box in their, in their attic, and they just don't realize that it's something of value. But based on the few letters that we do have that were found in the Alain Locke collection, it does seem that there was a definite level of familiarity, and that she could reach out to him and felt a level of comfort that she could reach out to him when she is being highly maligned and targeted, that, you know, she reached out to him as a source of, you know, possible like a lifeline to kind of help. But yeah, I wish I had more information about that, but unfortunately at the moment I don't. I do have a second book contract with Mississippi Press for a more substantive kind of analysis of Gwendolyn Bennett's work, and I'm kind of hoping that the momentum from this particular book will actually let more people know out there, because, you know, I'm talking to people, you know, who are scholars, but I'm also doing some programming just with general members of the community, and I'm hoping that as I'm working on that book, that I might be able to kind of, as a community, kind of uncover some other material, you know, for it. As for your second question about the second part of her life, so she, you know, she worked with the consumer, let me see here, I want to make sure I don't mispronounce or I've got a really nice timeline at the beginning of the book, which I think has really helped a lot of people understand a bit more about Bennett. So she marries Crosscup, her husband, in 1940. She's working at the Harlem Community Arts Guild in 41. She has a falling out with Augusta Savage during that period. She's doing the School for Democracy, the George Washington Carver School, Consumers Union. These are like the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And it's while she's in the 60s where she's working with the Consumers Union. Her second husband had family and friends kind of in the Pennsylvania area, and they started doing some vacations kind of there. And then they started thinking about, look, how about we kind of leave the rat race, so to speak, and just kind of time out and, you know, have a more simpler life. So they moved to Pennsylvania in the early, I think it was 1970, or is it? Yeah, in 70, they moved to Kutztown, Pennsylvania, which I'll be there at the university at the end of this month, because interestingly, a lot of people who, I got to meet some people and talk with them on the phone who knew Bennett in Pennsylvania, and when I was telling them that I was working on a Bennett book, they're like, oh, you're writing a book about Gwen. You know, she had an antique store with her husband, but what's so interesting about that? And then I told them about her whole life, you know, in the Harlem Renaissance, and they're like, I had no idea, you know. So Gwen didn't publicize, you know, all the, like at this point she's still, before Langston Hughes passed away, you know, they're writing to each other, they're spending Christmases together, you know, they're doing all sorts of, and she doesn't kind of gloat or anything like that. She has a very different, quiet life in the antiques industry, you know, and so yeah, people who knew her in Kutztown, and when they knew about this book and I'm contacting them, they're like, what? And then they've been very excited to learn about her, because they're like, we had no idea. She was a good friend of ours, you know, we bought antiques from her, you know, this is a table that I bought from her and Dick, you know, 30 years ago or whatever, and they're like, I had no idea that she, and I'm hoping, you know, when I go to Kutztown and I meet some of the community members, that, you know, they might be like, oh, you know, I've got this old painting, you know, maybe it's a Gwen painting, or I've got some letters, you know, and then that way, you know, then I can reach out to Howard or Schomburg or something like that, and we can get those things in the archive, you know, so that more scholars, you know, such as yourselves, can do some more work. So she had this very quiet existence in the 70s. Her husband, Dick, passed away in, was it 79? 80. He passed away in 80, and she died in 81. So it wasn't much long after. So she was really devastated, because her whole world essentially was Dick in Pennsylvania. And then when he passed unexpectedly, her health hadn't been very good. And when I talked to Sandy Govan, who was at University of North Carolina, and I'm still in communication with her today, she actually got to meet Gwen once when she was working on her dissertation. And she didn't, you know, Sandy didn't realize how much like on borrowed time she was when she actually met Gwen, the time that she met her, and she planned on going back to see her, and, you know, next thing she knew, Gwen was gone too. And unfortunately, Gwen's closest living relative, which is Dick's daughter from his first marriage, who now lives in Rhode Island, a lot of they were still in communication with Gwen, but when Gwen died, I think her closest relative didn't find out until like a week later. It wasn't like they communicated on a weekly basis or anything. So a lot of Gwen's stuff was just sold at auction You know, and apparently Gwen had a whole bunch of, like, she had a library in her house that had, you know, first editions that were signed by Langston and County and all that kind of stuff, and we don't know where they are. Sandy said that Gwen had said, oh, I've got a bunch of paintings up in my attic that I'd show you, but at this point, you know, Sandy, she has some illnesses and she wasn't able to get up on the ladder, and I think Gwen, you know, was like, it was too much for Gwen to do it. So Sandy was like, oh, next time I come, you know, I'll, you know, make sure I bring someone and, you know, we can go up into the attic and see, you know, what's there. Well, by the time, you know, Sandy went back, everything was sold, everything was gone, and we don't know where that stuff is. So it's a fact-finding mission, and I hope that this motivates more people. You know, I've had a lot of people from different parts of the country, you know, reach out now and are like, oh, you know, this is really interesting, and it's a really nice community that we're kind of building. You know, no one's territorial over their information. It's like we try to share as much as we possibly can, because, you know, this is just, I'm hoping that, you know, 50 years from now, there'll be or whenever, there'll be another collection, and maybe it'll be like an 8-volume set or something, because we'll just find so much stuff, you know, of Gwen's, but, you know, we'll see. This is a start, you know, yeah.
Time for one more question.
Okay, time for one more question, okay.
I'll take the question if that's okay with everybody. So you said that this is a start, and I think it's an excellent start.
Thank you.
Primarily because it's a group of primary sources, and then you give us a good timeline. So it's
Yes.
like a toolkit almost
Yes.
to build, you know, different spokes in the wheel of Gwendolyn Bennett literature.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate it. I look forward to looking into it a little bit deeper, and to, you know, look out for her, actually.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
you said, I like the way you advise the audience to look at paintings and see if you see a GB or a GBB or a
Yeah.
GBJ, and you might be onto something. So we'll just have to keep an eye out for her
Yeah.
amongst our resources here.
Yeah.
My question was, you are talking about a grant. You talked about a grant that you're going to get, and you also talked about the planning for your next book. Do you have any other plans beyond that for other publications, Gwendolyn Bennett related or not?
Yes, I'm always thinking about the next book project when I'm working on one. I'm always thinking of the next one. So, yeah, I want to do, so there's the next one with Mississippi Press. I actually want to do something with Anne Spencer. Yeah. She's my next one, because I think, you know, a lot of you probably already know who Anne Spencer is, so she at least has that name, whereas Gwendolyn Bennett necessarily didn't have that name. But there's so much about Anne Spencer that we don't know that needs to come out. And the one gentleman whose name escapes me, who wrote the first full-length text on Anne Spencer, he was working with the estate to work on a second text, and he passed away unexpectedly just a couple of years ago. So that kind of scholarship has seems to have ended. And I'm not sure if anyone has reached out to the estate yet. I was going to actually reach out to the estate myself, and I was going to give them a copy of the Gwendolyn Bennett book and kind of show them the kind of stuff that I do, and maybe we could, you know, work something out where I just think it's really important that Anne Spencer's work become known, and any of you who, you know, are thinking of academia, like, we don't make any money out of these things. We do them because we love them. And, you know, for the few copies that sell for the Anne Spencer one, like, maybe we could donate it, because her house, Anne Spencer's house, I don't know if you've been to it in Virginia, has beautiful gardens, you know, and, you know, maybe money from the book or whatever could go back to the house. So Anne Spencer is definitely on my radar. I think there's some more to be done with Bennett, but just like this particular book was with Lewis, and again, he's at Long Island University. The one book